Damon here with NLP Gym, and this is the interview that I've been wanting to do for quite some time because it's been a while since we had Sid Jacobson back in Santa Cruz, and he is once again coming to teach hypnosis by popular demand. That was what, in the surveys that we did, everyone wanted to learn from Sid after he taught us NLP Unplugged, which was a skills builder series or a skills builder workshop and for NLP. And then he taught us persuasion, and now he'll be back to teach hypnosis. So this is Dr. Sid Jacobson. Welcome.
Thanks, Damon. Good to be here again. I remember in that last workshop, I did just a very short hypnosis demonstration, and everyone missed the induction. It was kind of one of the fun things that I did, and I was surprised. I thought it was fairly obvious, but I guess it wasn't. So it was one of the things that people were curious about. They said, "How did you do that? When did you do that?" And I thought, well, maybe this is something you'd be interested in learning. And the whole group said, yes, we'd like to know more about how to do that. So
yeah, well, when it's done well, it should be that way, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So not everybody who's watching this knows who you are, and not everybody's experienced your training. So why don't we do just a little bit of going into your background, where you're from, how did you come about NLP, and the journey you've taken since those early days?
Sure. I'm originally from Chicago, but I've been living in New Orleans since 1970 when I moved here, go to school. And I have a master's degree in social work, and I have a Ph.D. in clinical psychology. It's my professional background. My NLP background goes back to 1978. I was in the, I believe, second NLP practitioner program with Richard Bandler, John Grinder, Judy Delosier, and Leslie Cameron Bandler in New Orleans. Actually, before that, I'd had a 2-day workshop with our friend Greg Brodsky, who lives in Santa Cruz as well, who was beginning to do a little teaching of NLP back then as well. And I've been in NLP ever since. I've been a trainer since 1982, I think officially, but I was doing it before that as well. And I've been using self-hypnosis actually since 1974 when I was in college. And I had a professor who taught us how to do it. And then I've been, through my NLP training, of course, I learned to do hypnosis clinically. And I've been teaching clinical hypnosis and teaching people to do self-hypnosis since really right after that practitioner training, 1978, pretty regularly. And had lots of other training since then, read a million books, and spent hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of hours with people in trance, just practicing. And that's really what it takes. So that's some of what I want to do. The other part of it is when I started doing practitioner trainings in 1982 or 3, that was a major part of practitioner training. It was standard to teach everyone to do Ericksonian hypnosis, and I taught classical hypnosis along with that because I thought people should have the whole view, where hypnosis came from, the basic skills that people need, and the Ericksonian approaches as well. And that was integrated into our NLP practitioner programs. It was just a part of the whole system. And I honestly can't conceive of somebody being fully trained in NLP without being fully trained in hypnosis as well.
Well, it's quite common practice these days. I can't even think of a practitioner training, at least in the US, that teaches hypnosis. It's always a separate program, if they even offer it. And that was actually one of my disappointments when I took my first and then my second practitioner training, was that there was no hypnosis. And then when I finally did take a hypnosis class, it was amazing because it broke NLP wide open for me and made things so much more understandable.
Well, it's interesting you put it that way, because for many people from the old days, especially, hypnosis broke NLP wide open. That's really sort of where NLP came from. But I think, it makes sense to think of it in either direction, because I can't conceive of them as two separate fields. They just seem to me to be so intertwined that they are really one thing. And as you say, many people who are doing practitioner trainings these days have either never learned to do hypnosis themselves, they never learned NLP from that background, and they never learned the clinical skills of doing that, or they've dropped it off to a separate training program, which a lot of people started doing a long time ago. And I've done sort of an informal survey over the last couple of years as well. There are a few people who are still doing hypnosis in their practitioner programs, but they're pretty few and far between, as you say.
Yeah. And I often get the question too, is what should you learn first, hypnosis or NLP? And I'm kind of in the same school as you are, is like they should be taught together. But if
Right.
someone doesn't have that option, do you have a suggestion for that? I know what I think. I have my own answer, but I want to hear yours.
Well, uh, actually, for me, once you learn NLP skills, not just thinking about it, not just a few techniques, but you actually develop the skills, it makes hypnosis so much easier, and it makes it make so much more sense. You can kind of skip over a lot of the things that classical hypnotists used to have to learn intuitively or just by trial and error. And they were building in skills unconsciously quite well, obviously, but it's so much easier if you have an NLP explanation of how and why it actually works. So I'm, like many of the other NLP institutes, I mean, if you're going to drop the hypnosis program out, you wouldn't start people with that and then take them into NLP training. It would be the other way around. That would be the way I would think about it.
Yeah, I did my NLP first and then hypnosis, and that worked out really well for me. Um, if somebody was confronted with, they have a hypnosis class coming up and there's no NLP class coming up, I know what I would say because my enthusiasm gets the better of me. And I'd say just go to the hypnosis and then take the NLP class whenever you can.
Yeah, do whichever one is available.
Right.
I don't think there would be a downside to that.
Right.
I think that it would work out just fine either way. I just think that NLP frames the whole idea much better for you, in much more contextually, in terms of skills, in terms of the relationship. One of the things we're going to talk about, I know you were wanting me to share a little bit about some of the content of the course. We're certainly going to talk about induction processes. Classical hypnosis comes down to two parts: hypnotic induction, which is getting someone into an altered state of some sort we call trance, and then utilization. What do you do once you get them there? Many people have the idea that hypnosis is just something you do to someone, where you put them into a trance, where you do it to them and then you tell them what to do, and all of a sudden they'll be different. And from movies or wherever, people get these ideas, but it just doesn't work very well if you do it that way. So we have to have the two. And of course, in the process of that, we're going to talk about the different ways of thinking about hypnosis. In that initial 6-day training that I went to with Bandler and Grinder, which was the original practitioner training program, it was just 6 days. But we were in beginner, intermediate, or advanced sort of tracks during that program. It was almost more like a conference than an actual straight through training program. You could kind of pick and choose different things you wanted to do, because John would take one stage, Richard would take another stage, and Judy would take another stage, and Leslie would take another stage. So they could all be teaching simultaneously different things, and you could pretty much pick and choose what you wanted to do. But we all came together for the part where John taught induction techniques, and we all came together for when Richard taught utilization techniques, because everybody wanted to do that. So they made that, the whole course for everyone. And in the process of that, one of the things that John talked about in terms of inductions, we talked about definitions of hypnosis. And a number of other people have done that too. He just touched on it a little bit, but I've gotten much deeper into it over the years. I've had some talks with Richard about it, and some others as well, Steve Gilligan and other people. And one of the standard definitions of hypnosis, if you go back to the work of Jay Haley, who was one of Erickson's students and actually wrote books about Erickson before Bandler and Grinder did, Jay always emphasized that hypnosis was a special relationship between the person doing the hypnosis theoretically and the client or the patient. And what he meant by that was it was a special form of rapport. And he used that word. He said it's a very special form of rapport in which the trust is so deep that the subject, if we want to call them that, the client, is willing to explore or do things or experience things that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do before or willing to do before, because they have that supportive relationship built in. So this is one of the reasons why I think NLP is so valuable, because we understand how that rapport works. We've got the mechanics down, as well as now we probably have the neurological background as well. I mean, anybody who's ever studied people knows that rapport is an important thing. Anthropologists have talked about it for years before we did an NLP, the whole notion of how we pace and match people and feed back information that's the same and send people those messages that say, I'm just like you are, you're just like I am. And we know that that's what builds rapport. Now, of course, people assume that it's the mirror neuron system in the brain that actually lights up and creates that sense inside, so that your mirror neurons and my mirror neurons are firing together. That's probably how the whole system works neurologically. It still has to be proved, but that's probably it. It makes sense. It's logical. Which of course doesn't make it true, but it's probably a good way to think about it. But that's what hypnosis is about. It's a special form of relationship. That's one way to define it. I'm going to give 5 other categories of definitions as well as we do it, and we're going to go through 8 different categories of how to do hypnotic inductions with people. And not 8 inductions, 8 different categories of inductions, because there's lots and lots of ways to induce trance. And then we're going to do some utilization patterns as well. What can you do to help somebody or help yourself using these tools?
So you're beating me to all my questions that I was going to ask.
Not the first time, is it?
One thing that did come up, which is kind of a little off topic from what we've been discussing, but what is your PhD in?
Clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology. And you worked as a psychologist for some time, didn't you?
I did not. I worked as a social worker for several years. Okay. And always wanted to get a PhD in clinical psychology. I always wanted to study psychology much deeper. Actually, originally, I'd wanted to be a research psychologist. I wanted to go the pure academic route. But then got much more.
Imagine you as a pure academic. That just doesn't seem your style at all.
You're probably right. And it's probably good that I didn't pursue going in that direction so much. And once I became a social worker, I realized that the clinical part was really where I wanted to be. So I just continued on. I just wanted to, partly I wanted the credential, but partly I wanted to study further and have the different point of view than just the social work background. I came from academic psychology first, and then went into social work, and then went back into clinical psychology. I wanted to have the breadth of those views and also the ability to maybe communicate in those different languages, because a lot of times psychologists and social workers don't, their communication is perfect in different directions. Yeah. And it's the same with psychiatrists and others as well. And I always felt that I was able to communicate more than adequately with all professionals in all the different realms.
Okay, great. So you started to go into this. I want to kind of come back to it and break it and chunk things down a little bit. If a person who's not had any hypnosis training whatsoever is watching this, what can they expect to get out of this training? What's in it for them?
Well, what's in it for everyone is that everyone's going to learn to manage their own states a lot better. We're going to learn about hypnotic inductions. We're going to learn how to do it with ourselves. There is a point of view that says that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So that if I'm actually doing a session with you, all I'm really doing is giving you a set of instructions or a set of signals. You're taking those signals and those instructions, and you're doing all the work yourself. And in one sense, that's certainly actually true. In another sense, we certainly have influence over other people. So everybody's going to get some of that. They're going to get their own state management, hypnotic state management to an extent, and learn the skills of influencing others to alter their states as well. Second thing people are going to get is they're going to get the opportunity to work on some things in this program. We have 3 days here. We can do a lot of good clinical work and good other kinds of work as well. For me, I'm not a purist in thinking that only clinicians can do hypnosis. No one else. So I've been doing hypnosis with people in business for years. I want people to be able to alter their states to be motivated or to be focused or to solve problems. I wrote a book on problem solving. A lot of that stuff was hypnotic. How do we alter our states so that we can get into uh, the reaches of our brain where we have information that we would not normally have in our conscious everyday thinking? And how can we use that in every aspect of our lives? So everybody's going to get a good deal of personal development out of this. Whether they ever expect to use this clinically with other people is irrelevant. They'll have the opportunity to have those skills and to build them. And I'll talk more about practicing and building the skills. I'll give people lots of books that I suggest to read and ways to practice, absolutely. But even without that, even without wanting to do it with someone else, everybody's going to get a great deal of personal development. So people can bring their issues with them, and we'll help work on those, whether those are your personal clinical issues or from some other area of your life, your business or your motivation or sports or whatever it might be.
Yeah, one of the things I like about your trainings is you come in with a very loose agenda, and the workshops are intimate enough where I remember I use this in my own workshops now. I totally ripped you off. You said, I don't do the workshop that I plan to. I do the workshop that's in the room. And already I can hear that coming out as you're speaking. You have that loose agenda, but you're kind of waiting to see who's in the room to sort of structure it around the people who are there.
Well, absolutely. And there are a number of things I'm absolutely going to do. We are going to go through definitions of hypnosis. We're going to go through categories of hypnotic induction. We're going to go through a number of different things that we call hypnotic phenomenon, things that you would do that you wouldn't see people do normally without being in trance, unless you knew what to look for. And so we're going to do those things. We're just going to do them in the context of what people need. And as far as the utilization patterns, we're going to utilize whatever we need to. I have some things planned, but again, the agenda is not nearly as important as the needs of the people that come to us. That's the clinical background coming through, right? I think anybody watching this who's ever been any kind of a therapist or a counselor, or even tried to help somebody else, even trying to help a friend, you hear a friend or someone tell you, I've got this problem, and you go, okay, come on over, we'll talk about it. And you think of the 400 things you want to say to them and what you're going to do to try to, and then they get there and it's all different than what you expected. You just, you have to go in some completely different direction and be able to use some other set of skills than whatever it was you planned during your agenda. And I think that workshops are the same way. This kind of workshop is the same way.
Yeah, definitely. So you use the word personal development a few times, and that's always like a key phrase for me. I hear personal development, I'm like, So, and then another one for me is transformation. I'm teaching Transforming Yourself coming up this coming weekend, actually, with Steve Andreas's blessing,
right?
Which was important to me before I decided to do it. Transformation, personal development, evolving yourself. These are all terms that really catch my attention, and there's a lot of people that are the same way, and that's why they get into NLP. And also, I remember reading Transformation, the original, the out of print hypnosis book, which is one of the best hypnosis books I've ever read. And you don't know who's talking, if it's Grinder or Bandler. And I guess if you know them both like you do, you might be able to pick out each one's voice.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about that because I was in the room for some of that. When I was in that 6-day practitioner course, there was a guy sitting next to me who's now named Steve Andreas, and we had an empty chair in between us, and each one of us had our tape recorders on that chair. We just did that for a couple of days, and we each recorded those hypnosis sessions, and the whole induction part became a whole section of transformations. So I know exactly who was talking during some of those parts, and I still have the tapes.
Oh.
But you're right. Sometimes you can't tell.
Yeah.
And that's because Richard and John they had the ability to be so seamless. They were doing hypnosis with themselves, with each other, and backing up to that, you're talking about personal development. Learning to do self-hypnosis was a major, major turning point in my life when I was an undergraduate in studying psychology. I was taking a graduate level course in, I guess we called it abnormal psychology at the time, which is kind of bizarre name for anything, but that's the classic course in any psychology curriculum on studying people who have, quote, mental illness of whatever sort or any kind of deviant behavior. And the teacher was wonderful. It was the first time in my university that actually ever hired a clinical psychologist to teach things that had to do with clinical work. And he was wonderful. He was very experienced. He was an extremely experienced hypnotist. He had done all the work. It was back before NLP, but he had done all the work that you need to really be a good therapist. And he taught the whole class how to do self-hypnosis. And he and I became friends afterwards. And I really used my self-hypnosis. I really learned to do it well, to focus, to relax, to get a good night's sleep, to do a number of other things, but also to use it to solve problems and to grow in a number of ways personally, to develop myself in ways. So I think this is a very, very valuable skill. I don't think there's anything I've ever found that's better as a general set of skills for improving yourself than hypnosis.
Okay, so you're doing it again. You're answering my question before I ask. You're like mind reading.
Sorry, not sorry.
Well, to finish my illustration, one of the things that was in that book, Transformation, was a very earnest statement. I wish I knew if it was Bandler or Grinder, just for my own sake. But it said, yes, like he was answering a question, hypnosis will evolve you, and just do it and it will evolve you. And I think he was purposefully vague about what he meant by evolving. And when I hear those words, which are nominalizations, transformation, personal development, evolution, I immediately plug in my own meanings, which is what a hypnosis is all about when you hear those words. What I recognize too is that not everybody else is plugging in meanings to that whenever they hear these words, or I send out emails or I put out press releases. And I'm realizing that some people haven't grounded these words in certain meanings.
Right.
So I was going to ask you a little bit, and you started to go into this. That's why I was saying you're answering my question. What does it really mean to evolve yourself, to transform yourself, to personally develop yourself? Like I said, I have my own meanings for this, and a lot of people do, but a lot of people don't. So for somebody who's kind of like didn't have meanings plugged in for those words, how would you describe it?
It's an interesting conversation we're having right now about this. One of the books I wrote was called Solution States. It was on problem solving for people in business. And one of the responses I got from a lot of people was, what do you mean problem solving? We don't believe in problems in NLP. We only believe in outcomes and goals. We only believe in gathering resources and reaching outcomes and goals. Well, that's fine, but that's not the way that most people in the world think about it. Most people in the world come to you because they've got a problem, or they come to a business workshop or seminar because they're trying to solve problems. So in the sense of pacing people, that's one of the ways that I like to think about things. If you come to me and say, I have problems I need to solve, I go, great, let's solve those problems. In the course of that, I'm going to help you develop well-formed outcomes. I'm going to help you know what your long-term goals are and the effects you want to get out of the changes that you make, figure out what changes those are, and develop yourself in that direction. In terms of the word evolution, I just think of that longer term, and not even always longer term, but in making bigger leaps, more than just solving one problem. We have this concept in NLP of generative change. So if you come to me with a problem and I say, okay, we can just solve this problem, or we can solve the problem in a way that generates solutions to a lot of other things that really gets you to change in a number of ways, all of which take you in the path that you want to go in your life. That generally is what we want to do if we're working with somebody. We don't just want to solve the one problem, though there's nothing wrong with that. But as master practitioners or trainers of NLP, we like to think bigger than that. To me, this word evolution is all about that. What does it mean for you to evolve? So I don't think I can really give someone else their definition of evolution. But usually I start the discussion the way that we just did. If you were different, how would you want to be different? What's holding you back from being different? People will say, well, I've got this problem or that problem. I've got this block, or I don't know how to do this. We'll explore all those things so that we can do something that those aren't holding somebody back. so that they can move forward in the direction that they want to go. I think evolution means change in a way that's beyond keeping the person on the same path that they're on, or the same kinds of behaviors or the same kinds of thinking. We can talk about this in the way that we do in NLP with different logical levels. Usually an evolution includes some kind of a belief and identity change where somebody feels that they become a different person than they were before. Now that's not always necessary, but it's big. And sometimes people want the big stuff, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say, that can be a very scary thing, even though it's a positive and generative thing. When you start to transform,
right?
I know I experienced a tremendous amount of fear. You start thinking like, oh, or my loved one's going to recognize me. Will I disappoint someone? All these weird things start coming up, even though it's what you wanted. And hypnosis, NLP, a good coach, a good teacher, a good mentor is almost essential for helping you get through that.
Well, I think that's right. And you also mentioned context. Are my friends and loved ones going to see me the same way? So any good people helper is going to help a person make whatever changes or growth or evolution they're making in the sense of the context that they're in. Because I think that's important. This is where the whole idea of ecology came from.
Yeah.
If change isn't ecological, if it doesn't maintain the balance, if it causes more problems than it solves, then it isn't a very worthwhile change. So this is something we're going to explore as well. One of the things that hypnosis absolutely gives you the ability to do is to check unconsciously to find out if the change that you're making is ecological.
And I think I would have to say probably the single most important, and I'm sure you've had this happen so many times, working on yourself or having even maybe Bandler worked with you a little bit on some of it, putting those sort of putting those instructions into you hypnotically that you've already checked to make sure that they're ecological, the changes you want to make, and you just kind of forget about it. It drops into unconsciousness, and then a few months, a few years later, or something, you suddenly go, "Well, wait a minute, here I am. Those instructions have carried out, and I haven't." Sure, you worked for it. If it was something you had to achieve, but it doesn't feel like it because you just sort of set that path, and you were on that path, and it was something. I've done this hypnotically many times for myself, and I've had people hypnotize me to do that. And a few months later, or 6 months later, or a year later, boom, there it is. And then if you're Judy Delosier, who spent some time with Erickson, she used to do that. She used to, I call it a hypnotic bomb. She would just whisper something in my ear while I was working with someone else, or I was distracted doing something completely different. And I would look and she was already off, gone.
Yeah.
Then 6 months later, something would happen and then I'd hear her voice. I'd go, oh, okay, now I get it. It's just amazing how with hypnosis, you can sort of drop these instructions in. They go unconscious, which in some ways makes it work even better. And suddenly you arrive.
Well, in some ways, it's making it work on the level that it has to work on.
Yeah.
A lot of times conscious mind change is fine. I'm a huge fan of conscious mind change where people, work out logically what it is they need to do and can make that happen. And a lot of times that works great. Sometimes that's not where the change needs to be. And I have stories after story, story after story. I do remember, I'll tell you one quick one. I had one client many years ago who I would do every 2-3 weeks, maybe. He would come and see me and I would do a quick session, and he was evolving a whole lot, and he said so. And I remember one day he said to me, Sid, I know you are giving me lots of vitamins that you're putting into my unconscious mind. And I don't know when you're doing it, and I don't know what they are, and I don't want you to tell me. Because it's working, and I know if you tell me, I'll screw it up. So just keep doing whatever you're doing. I just wanted you to know that. So, some people actually have that awareness of that going on at the time. And I know, for you, when you were working with Judy, you mentioned to me before that those little bombs go off, the things that she set up, and the change happens naturally. If you think about change in general, how many things have we changed in our lives that we just didn't even know about? Right. We changed the clothes we wear, we changed the foods we eat, we changed the way we diet or exercise. And a lot of times we just do that on some sort of an unconscious level. We don't plan to do it. We just find ourselves being different over time. Our attitudes change, our taste in music or movies or books. A lot of these things are what we would call naturalistic changes, and whatever that means. Maybe we got hypnotic suggestions from our environment, from the people around us. I think that's the way that it works. Commercials wouldn't be on television if it didn't work, right? So so some of those things are going to be what we explore a little bit in this workshop.
So I have no doubt that you're going to be full of stories. And I think the people who have attended your past two workshops, by the second workshop, they were kind of onto you. They knew that when you were telling stories, you were teaching on multiple levels. There was definitely a conscious level and definitely an unconscious level. And it was fun at the end of your stories because I noticed your tonality getting lower and lower and slower and slower. Your words were getting slower. And then by the time you were done, everybody's just like zonked in a hypnotic state. And it's usually at the beginning and at the end of class you would do this. And I started to catch on to what you were doing. And it's so funny because I think this by the second workshop, people had caught on to what you were doing, but they were like, they didn't care, like, give me more. And they
Right. Keep
wanted
doing
more.
it. Right.
For those who are returning, who have seen you in action before, I'm sure they're going to be ready for that. But that's probably also why they will be coming. They're going to want more of that. And
I'm sure that's true.
for the people who have not been to your workshops, I guess I'm letting them in on the little secret, but I can almost assure each one of them they're not going to have any idea of what's going on probably throughout the entire workshop until it's over with. They'll probably look back and go, "Oh yeah, that's when he was doing it." So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, that's good. And believe me, they'll have plenty of conscious mind things to do as well. Both parts of everyone, conscious and unconscious minds, whatever that means, will be very, very active during the entire 3 days.
Very cool. All right. Well, unless you've got anything else you want to throw in there, I think I'm done with my questions.
Well, good. Well, just I thank you for these questions. I always enjoy having these discussions with you, and come to the workshop. Anyone who's watching, we're going to have a really good time. You're going to learn a lot and get a great deal out of it. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone.
And for those of you who are watching, that workshop will be June 10th, 11th, and 12th, and that will be actually in Aptos, which is right a little tiny town right next to Santa Cruz. It'll be the first 3-day workshop you've done with us.
Right.
Really exciting, and that was typically a complaint from the people who attended the workshops in the past was the 2-day workshop was just not enough.
Yeah, it's sometimes true. Right.
We're stepping up to the 3-day workshop, and June 10th, 11th, and 12th. And I'm really happy about this because one of the things that you and I agreed on, like probably within minutes of meeting each other, was I noticed you were bringing back a lot of what was not taught in typical NLP trainings these days. And you're a good example, I think. And I've had exposure to a lot of trainers and friends with a lot of the early developers. You are a good example of keeping it simple, sticking with the original stuff, a lot of the original stuff that was taught. And that's sort of been like your evolution. It's not like you're trying to constantly create a lot of new technology. You've just evolved with focusing on the skill sets that the original stuff that they really spend a lot of time with in the early days that they're not spending so much time with these days because the technology has grown so much.
Right.
So that's what I really appreciate about your teaching.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being able to do it too, because there's so many people who learn very advanced techniques and they don't have the basic skills to make them work.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do something about. That's why NLP Gym exists.
Exactly. It was one time when I met a trainer from Brazil who was in a trainer class at NLP University. And I was just showing some basic like sensory acuity stuff. And afterward, he came to me and he said, what you were doing, is that like old school NLP? And I was like, man, this guy teaches NLP and in Brazil. I was like, I didn't know how to explain to him. I was like, that is the foundation of NLP. If you don't have those skills, then good luck with the processes because you're going to be hit or miss. You're going to be, sometimes you'll run a process and just by luck, it'll work. Right. But without those skills, I mean, you have no way of sort of intentionally making it work like 80 to 90% of the time.
Right. Right.
Yeah, the thing that I really like about your workshops is you're very much skill based. You don't throw a lot of stuff at people to the point where they get kind of confused, because that's what the newer advanced technology does, unless you have that background. So
I
focus
agree.
on a skill set, you can actually walk away from the workshop and have real skills that you can put into your everyday life.
That's the intention.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's have a great workshop. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, really great having you, and it'll be even better when you're here.
Thanks so much. Thanks again, David.